miembros, que pasarán a ser 32, y hacer frente. Gran Bretaña y España se encuentren tan unidos y tan próximos es una garantía de que las cosas van a ir bien. Pues muchísimas gracias, ministro.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Minister, for welcoming me here. I can't believe it's 17 years, and that shouldn't happen. We see each other a lot in Brussels and have bilaterals, but we haven't had more, because our military does. Our military is often deployed in the same places around the world. The amazing thing is, I remember when I was previously the security minister's ties that Britain and Spain had on working on counter-terrorism, for example, and organised crime. And I also know that in military terms, we're both in Iraq, we are also up in the Baltics. Spain, like Britain, is one of those countries that's out and about in the world with their military. We don't just keep our military at home. We not only, we actually put our forces behind them and we stand up for them. And so it was no surprise that when President Putin invaded illegally Ukraine and started the war against advice from prime ministers and presidents from around the world, that Spain was absolutely shoulder to shoulder with supporting Ukraine and alongside the United Kingdom was at the forefront of to help those people. And I'm delighted that, one of the things that Putin got wrong was that he actually failed to realise that Spain, like Britain, all the political divide, care for their values and will stand up for those values, whether they are in Spain or in Ukraine. And the international community, NATO is united, the European Union is united, and others, such as Australia, have all contributed to effectively this fight in standing up for those people who are right now fighting to save their country. I always reflect on this statement by President Zelensky. If Putin stops fighting, there will be peace, but if Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no more Ukraine. And I think we shouldn't doubt Russia's determination to continue this fight, to effectively rub out Ukraine as a nation. And we see on the ground their military tactics range from rape to other war crimes, to shooting on sight, fighting age in areas that have been occupied. And more recently, we see signs of Russia tricking Ukrainians to thinking they are going to be escaping or leaving occupied, and they are executing those people. It is a horror inflicted in a generation that I thought we would never see again. And I think we should be very proud of the EU standing firm, and we will continue to do so. I'm really looking forward to the NATO summit. I think it's going to be a great success. I think it's also really important that the public in countries like Spain realise that NATO is for everyone. It is for different parts. NATO has a role to play in securing our seas around the Atlantic and Spain. Wagner, for example, who are currently destroying governments really across, or corrupting governments in parts of Africa, of insecure Africa, are mitigated against whatever happens. And NATO does not just start and stop in one part of its territory. It is right across Turkey, both strong allies. Turkey is really important for us both. Sea trade is really important for our nations, and industrial collaboration. We make the Typhoon together. We make and buy the transport plane, an excellent plane, together. We share technologies in our weapon systems, and one of the lessons from this is that NATO and the West has not been prepared in our equipment and supply chains for wars, and we need to work together to make sure we rectify that. So thank you very much for inviting me. I'm sorry it's short and sharp, but I'll also see you twice. It's like we always say in Britain, and eventually two turn up at the same time, and I'll be here twice in the space of 3 weeks. So thank you very, very much.
No sé si hay algunas preguntas.
Muchas gracias. Esteban Villarejo, del periódico ABC. Al señor ministro británico tenía una pregunta del patrullero Trent. ¿Le gustaría que Gibraltar tuviera un papel mayor como base militar en el futuro o en el seno de la OTAN? Y a la señora ministra española, ¿qué espera sacar España a la cumbre de Madrid respecto al nuevo concepto estratégico de la OTAN? Muchas gracias.
So I'm not sure what you mean by strengthening Gibraltar as a military base. Gibraltar, it was in the 1980s and 1990s, and indeed over history. There's definitely much less there than there used to be in that sense. So I'm not quite sure you would do that. But look, importance, as have Britain's presence in Cyprus. They are strategically important. Spain's position at this end of the Mediterranean is incredibly strategically important, and for the European Union as well. It's very important. Spain is on the front line of North Africa, so it's always important. It's important for all of us. Obviously we talk about Gibraltar. Spain's position is clear. Our position is clear. There's obviously EU negotiations that go on with the post-Brexit relationship. Look, fundamentally, we are allies. Gibraltar is not used in any way towards Spain at all. That is a sort of, it's a myth if people say that. That's just not true. But I'm not sure what you mean by strengthening it. It hasn't been strengthened. In fact, I'm strengthening it. It hasn't been strengthened. In fact, I'm constantly being lobbied by Gibraltarian governments to give space for housing.
Bueno, lo primero, para nosotros es importante que esta cumbre se celebre aquí en Madrid, que después de 40 años de pertenencia de España, se pone de relieve que efectivamente todos los aliados tienen a España como un socio serio, fiable, responsable en todas las misiones en las que es necesario estar y siempre defendiendo los valores de la alianza, que finalmente son los valores de las democracias y los valores de la... Ser sin ninguna duda una cumbre histórica, y el que se celebre en Madrid es muy importante. Va a ser una cumbre histórica, en primer lugar, porque se va a producir la ampliación a 2 miembros más de la importancia, pero sobre todo en el contexto en el que estamos, en una guerra como es la guerra de Ucrania, con una invasión por parte de Rusia absolutamente inaceptable. Y una vez más, que la Alianza Atlántica está unida, que todos los países defienden los mismos valores, que los países que forman, que por tanto vamos a estar siempre defendiendo los valores de democracia, de paz, de libertad y de seguridad. Desde ese punto de vista es esencial y fundamental, también un concepto estratégico y porque también va a marcar una nueva era en las relaciones con la Unión Europea. La Unión Europea, que acaba de aprobar estratégica frente a unas situaciones históricas que hemos podido vivir de ciertos desencuentros entre la Unión Europea y la OTAN, lo que sí se pone de relieve es que cuando hay un enemigo común, tanto la Unión Europea como la OTAN trabajan con los mismos objetivos y esa idea esencial y fundamental de complementariedad. Por tanto, yo creo que si algo ha demostrado la invasión en Ucrania es que la OTAN goza de muy buena salud, de que la OTAN es un firme baluarte de los derechos y libertades y ahí, por supuesto, va a encontrar a nuestros dos países esos derechos, esas libertades, defendiendo la paz y, como lo hace España siempre, firmemente comprometida. En este momento, como ustedes saben, tenemos más de 500 hombres y mujeres en Letonia. Este lunes estuve en Lituania, están también en el mar Mediterráneo, también en Turquía, con la batería que tenemos tanto es esa manifestación clara de España como país serio y comprometido en OTAN.
Lang from Reuters. The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister has said it would consider allowing grain corridors out of Ukraine in return for the lifting of some sanctions. Is that feasible? Turkey be an option to escort those if Russia vetoed Western ships? And would the EU and the UK be willing to consider dropping some sanctions in return for that? To both ministers, please.
So the Deputy Russian Foreign Minister is saying that because his country has invaded another country, he's going to do us all a favour by lifting effectively a blockade of that country and potentially starving many countries around the world of grain. I mean, just listen to it. I mean, as a proposition, I call upon Russia to do the right thing, which is, first of all, leave Ukraine. But secondly, that grain is for everyone. 20% of that grain goes, I think, to Libya. Some of that, or it goes to Yemen. 40%, I think, goes to Libya. People around the world are relying on that grain to feed themselves, not else. And so I call upon Russia to do the right thing in the spirit of humanity and let the grain of Ukraine out, stop stealing the grain. We see Russia stealing the grain for its own use. Not talk about sanctions. Let's talk about doing the right thing by nations around the world. And Also, we know their track record of humanitarian corridors. It seems to be people get put in buses and then shot at on the way out of them. What we do is we need Russia to declare that they'll do the right thing, and at the same time, if there are nations in the Black Sea who wish to provide security for that, then of course we'll explore what we can do to support them. But fundamentally, I think Russia needs to let Ukraine send its grain to the people around the world who need it.
Completamente. Ahí completamente de acuerdo.
Al juez del caso del espionaje de su teléfono móvil y del presidente Sánchez, esa habilitación a darles información al juez que requiera. Yo quería saber si van a ser tan diligentes cuando el juez que está llevando el caso de los independentistas, si van a ser tan diligentes cuando requiera el juez esa información. Gracias.
Que yo sepa, no hay nada que el Gobierno tenga en este momento de juez. Por lo tanto, usted me está planteando una hipótesis. Siempre que cualquier juez le pide algo al Gobierno, inmediatamente, cuando puede contestarlo, lo contesta. Usted me está hablando de si hay una realidad en la que hay un retraso, pues usted me lo dice y yo le daría una explicación al retraso, pero no tengo constancia de que en este momento el Gobierno esté incurriendo en ningún retraso con la Administración de Justicia.
Apoya la inclusión del flanco sur en el concepto estratégico de la OTAN.
What do you mean, which part of the southern flank, as in, or? Yeah, I mean, look, the NATO Strategic Compass has to involve the whole of NATO. I mean, it has to involve all the. What we will know after this invasion is that Russia's army will be exhausted. Russia's army are already fairly broken. We see Russia taking out of retirement equipment. So Russia's navy will be more of a threat, and it is likely Putin will use his navy as a way of intimidating people it wants to.
Hemos hablado también de este tema en la reunión y conocen perfectamente la posición de España, es una aproximación 360 grados y, como bien decía el ministro, evidentemente hay una realidad en la guerra de Ucrania, pero tenemos una situación en África, que es una situación que es muy preocupante desde todos los puntos de vista, tanto en el tema del yihadismo, plantea esa aproximación 360 grados, pero hemos estado hablando y esa preocupación.
Volviendo, Ayman Subir, de la cadena Al Jazeera, volviendo sobre este mismo tema, me gustaría que nos aclarara este concepto 360, o sea, ¿habría una área física de la OTAN en países africanos, con bases incluso?
Bueno, yo tengo que decirle que no estar, sino de ver los problemas que existen. Hay una realidad, el fenómeno del terrorismo se está extendiendo, se sigue extendiendo. La Rusia en algunos países de África es absolutamente conocida, no solamente del ejército ruso, sino también de la fuerza Wagner. En este momento está habiendo esta invasión en Ucrania. Tenemos que ser conscientes de que en África hay una extensión muy clara por parte de Rusia. Porque ya digo, no solamente es el terrorismo, sino también otro tipo de mafias, como es lo relativo a la inmigración. Conscientes de que el mundo actual tiene muchísimas vulnerabilidades, tiene muchísimas amenazas. Esas amenazas van desde y lo importante, y por eso también van a salir conclusiones esenciales de esa cumbre de OTAN, es que el mundo entero sea consciente de que las amenazas son muchos, de que las vulnerabilidades son grandes. Una alianza como es la Alianza Atlántica, que es una alianza militar sin duda, pero que es sobre todo una alianza de valores y de valores democráticos. Eso es algo que a mí me importa remarcar siempre. Nosotros lo que hacemos en la alianza es defender y trabajar por esos valores democráticos y sobre todo por la paz y la libertad y la seguridad en el mundo.
I mean, you shouldn't underestimate the tentacles of where Russia has placed its tentacles around the world. The Wagner Group in Libya had possession of fighter jets, I think SU, indeed SA-22 anti-air missile systems. Now, they didn't, I don't know any mercenary that usually produce those type of things. You know, Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner Group, is extremely close to, and they are clearly linked as an entity, and any denial is undermined by the evidence. In fact, what we're also seeing is we know that Russia uses migration flows deliberately as a weapon. Look in Belarus, both Russia and Belarus were actively flying people, I think, from Iraq with promises into Belarus and then literally shoving them through the fence into Europe. They can use migrant flows as a weapon at one end of Europe. They can certainly use it at the other. And if the likes of Wagner get the control they have, or they'd like to have in places like Libya, or indeed what we see they're already doing, do not think that Spain will be untouched by that, because, of course, one of the weapons in the sub-threshold arsenal that Russia is cyber, migration, transnational crime. Actually why the EU strategic compass is so important to complement NATO, because what the migrant flows, transnational organised crime, by working together on that, they can help Europe be more resilient. The geography purely, but it must make sure it plans and builds its resilience from the impact of interference by the likes of Wagner. Even right now we see people being taken from the likes of North Africa and Syria to fight in Ukraine on behalf of Russia. It should be a 360 response.
Muy bien. Bueno, pues, ¿alguna pregunta más?
Buenas tardes. Y respecto a la admisión de los recursos por los indultos del proceso, y si el Gobierno, quería saber si el Gobierno se plantearía recurrir en el caso, si cree que el nuevo acuerdo alcanzado en cada uno de los recursos por los indultos del proceso, y si el Gobierno, quería saber si el Gobierno se plantearía recurrir en el caso de que se produzca una revocación de esos indultos. Y luego también, si cree que el nuevo acuerdo alcanzado en Cataluña entre varios partidos políticos, incluyendo el PSC, daría cumplimiento de esa sentencia del mínimo del 25% de clases en castellano.
Lo que puedo decir es que las decisiones que toman los jueces hay que respetarlas siempre, se compartan o no se compartan, y por tanto es una decisión que se ha tomado y hay que respetarla. La decisión que deberán tomar, pues habrá que respetarla también. En todo caso, todo al otro tema, tengo que decirle lo mismo. Las sentencias hay que cumplirlas siempre. Eso es lo único que yo le puedo decir. Bueno, gracias a todos, ¿eh? Muchas gracias.
Good. Thank you very much.